When you explore the land surrounding Ishgard, the grand and scattered ruins of her ancient predecessor are the most salient and conspicuous features of the landscape. The sordid tale of the foundations of modern Ishgard are central to the story of Heaven's Ward, presented to us repeatedly and with so little euphemism that it's inconceivable that someone could have hit the current endgame without understanding at least that the 1,000-year Dragonsong War was preceded by an age of peace where man and dragon lived and worked in harmony. Besides perhaps that of ancient Ul'dah, no part of Eorzean history has been made so clear and approachable to the player. The narratives of the other nation-states remain to most of us incredibly vague and disjointed. They can only be pieced together by digging rather deep through side quest dialogue, flavor text, hunt marks, sightseeing logs, gathering logs, and so on and so forth. It is for this reason that I receive many requests to talk about the background of each of the contemporary cities of Eorzea. I've already explored a fair part of the origins of Gridania in that dark intermediary civilization of Gelmora, and I would like to do the same today for Ul'dah. But you must appreciate that to understand the history and culture of the Jewel of the Desert, we need to start looking long before its conception. For thousands of years, our continent was home to the Elazan alone. None of the other modern peoples of Eorzea were to be seen for some time after the fall of Ul'dah, according to any source to which we have yet had access. It seems most likely at this point to have been during the 5th Astral Era that Lalafells began emigrating north from their native islands south of the Sil'dih. The Miqo'te had travelled from Mericidia further south still during the preceding Umbral Era, but they had been motivated by cold and hunger and crossed frozen land bridges, whereas it seems that the Lalafells were motivated primarily by trade, and there was probably not much trading to be done during the 5th Umbral Era. So a wave of plains folk settled on Vilbrand, and the Dunes folk landed in Thanalan, and it's safe to assume that for a time they continued in much the same vein as their traditional lifestyles. In the case of the Dunes folk, this would have involved roaming the deserts in communities built on the backs of great beasts of burden, trading with communities and travellers. The 5th Astral Era saw the flourishing of Amdapor, Nim, and a third nation home to Shatotu and a culture of black magic that has remained unnamed, but I've previously thought reasonable to describe as Proto-Belah'dia, since Belah'dian sites such as the Temple of Karn have been likely recommissioned from or built on top of or around these older ruins. That said, some people have recently noticed common assets between the Temple of Karn and the ancient aqueducts of Azys La, and posited that the lower levels of Karn might actually be built by a pre-Magitech Ul'dah. There is evidence for a sun worship culture embedded in Allagan history, but that is really a whole other discussion for another time. The post-50 White Mage quests apparently refer to a people named the Miachi, in association with Amdapor and Nim, and this seems most likely to be the proper name for Proto-Belah'dia, but I'm still not quite positive on this point. So these three nations eventually clashed in what is now known as the War of the Magi at the end of this astral era. The Black Mages allegedly summoned Diabolos in Amdapor, although I suspect that this was in fact the work of the Amdapori themselves. And the elementals of the Twelveswood finally lost their patience and flooded the entirety of Eorzea, bringing about the 6th Umbral Era, sweeping away each of these civilizations and presumably killing almost everyone in the realm. The Dunes folk that emerged from the receding tides at the dawn of the 6th Astral Era in Thanalan long laboured and eventually built Belah'dia, the cultural and architectural mother of Ul'dah. To put it into context, the founding of this nation would have been within a few centuries of that of modern Ishgard, following the slaughter of Ratatoska by the Knights of Thordan. The young Belah'dian nation succeeded in repelling at least one attempted Heora conquest of Thanalan, of which the huntmark Alban the Ashen was apparently a ranking officer. At a glance, it can be hard to tell the difference between the ruins of Belah'dia and those of Sil'dih, but the more notable Belah'dian sites include the Invisible City, which hugs the edge of the ravine between Drybone and Welwick Wood in eastern Thanalan, which is theorized by modern Eorzeans to actually be a tomb and monument of Sultan Lalafuta IV. This ravine was formed when the falling shards of Dalamud sundered eastern Thanalan, and the ruins were previously buried under thousands of tons of rock. Looking north from Highbridge, you can see as part of this complex a Malm-High idol of Azima, keeper of the sun and central deity of Belah'dia. The Temple of Khan was another monument to Azima built upon a pre-existing Proto-Belah'dian labyrinth, and it was used as a canvas for the sultans in much the same habits as those of Ramses II of ancient Egypt's New Kingdom, whom notoriously added his own image and inscriptions to already established sites and would even replace the heads of statues of his forebears with those of his own likeness to ensure that he would be credited for projects far beyond his ability, revered long after his death, and subsequently achieve some kind of immortality. The common and repeated Egyptian motifs through the Temple of Khan paint Azima in this culture as very much parallel and equivalent to Amon-Ra. In the Temple of Khan, we also see the Scales of Judgment, a symbol that persists in modern Ul'dah and one that is once again taken from Egyptian antiquity. Deceased Egyptians on the threshold of the afterlife would have their heart weighed by Anubis on a scale against a feather of Ma'at, and if it was found to be heavier, their wickedness would be thus affirmed and they would be consumed by the crocodile demon Amut. We'll come back to the evolution of this motif in Thanalan later on. Finally, the tip of presumably Belah'dian ruins can be found in the Sargoli Desert, and the Sons of St. Koinak seem to believe that if we were to dig deeper still, we would also find Allagan relics beneath the sands. As is so common with adolescent monarchical governments, Belah'dia was consumed by a dispute over succession after just a few centuries, and so the nation's land and resources was split. Sasagan ul-Sisigan and his supporters formed the nation of Ul'dah, established the Sultan Sworn, and forged Khotana, Joyus, and Durandal for the first paladins, whilst the other competitor for the throne of Belah'dia and his own faithful became Sil'dih. The most likely name we have for the founder of Sil'dih is Lalawefu Sil-Tatawefu, since we know that it was this ruler's death which spelled the beginning of the end for the evidently short-lived Sil'dih, and Sasagan ul-Sisigan was still alive by Eric's reports when Ul'dah conquered its sister state. The War of Sisters began over resources. Thanalan had suffered such a series of droughts that Ul'dah, at least according to Ul'dah, was forced to attack Sil'dih over their monopoly of the land's remaining water supplies. The trader's spurn, a kind of biological weapon which appeared both in the Hildebrand questline and the starting quests for Ul'dah, was developed at this time and used on the citizens of Sil'dih to transform them into zombies. The official Ul'dah account is that the trader's spurn was used by the Sil'dian elite against their own to bloat their dwindling armies, but we have since uncovered an Ul'dah secret society dedicated to burying the truth that the weapon was in fact developed by Ul'dah's own thaumaturges and unleashed within the city of Sil'dih. So Sil'dih was leveled and its gates sealed, leaving the living, dead and undead buried within, and Ul'dah quickly acquired the whole of Thanalan for itself. This brings us to about 400 years before the present, and despite the recent decline in the absolute wealth and power of the Sultanate, Ul'dah from this point resembles pretty closely what it is today. The culture of Ul'dah as a child of Belah'dia might be explained through the differences in that shared motif which I've already mentioned, the Scales of Judgment. In Belah'dia, these scales balance the flame of magic with the fruit of knowledge. The founders of Belah'dia understood well that it was the unbridled pursuit of magic as a means to gain power which had so recently and completely crippled the realm and destroyed every one of its great nations. In this symbol, we see that although the disciplines of magic were still valuable and central to Belah'dian society, it was always measured against their knowledge of the past that might check their hubris. Magic was a means not to power but to further knowledge and in linear growth with their advancement of magic. The dangers of magic would thereby never again outweigh their ability to manage it responsibly. The flame for Ul'dah is not one of magic, however. Its origin has been conflated with martial prowess, and that prowess not limited to any particular discipline. The flame of Ul'dah is the flame of might, and its counterweight is not the fruit of knowledge but the jewel of prosperity. So the immortal flame standard is both a perversion of the Belah'dian ideological tradition and a celebration of an attitude which invites conflict, self-interest, and all the traits of those ancient nations which fell on their own swords. This is the symbol of a governing attitude which conquered Sil'dih for its resources, which enslaved a race of Gigas to labor in its mines and buried them alive when they could no longer be controlled. an attitude which turned against the Sultanate after generations of perpetuance, so that legislative and sovereign power is without exception handed to the wealthier citizens of the state in the form of the syndicate, and the purchasing of political favors is not called corruption, it is the natural process and continues without pretense or shame. We know that it is for these reasons that Sultana Nanamo Ul'Namo wishes to see a democratic Ul'dah, and that Rabban al-Din has been trying for the longest time to beat the syndicate at their own game, but I do not think revolution in Ul'dah is as close as it seems. The primary cult of Ul'dah has shifted away from Azima and towards the dualistic and interwoven Nald'Thal, a deity that governs trade and commerce on both sides of the veil of life. Worshipping the aspect of Nald is inducive to success in amassing material wealth in the corporeal plane, and the cult of Thal is centered on the miserly supposition that this wealth might be carried into the afterlife. We see this materialistic attitude echoed in other public monuments around Ul'dah, such as this conspicuous foundation in front of the ossuary claiming that divinity is the color of gold, and this one in front of the quicksand reading, "Greatness is depth of pocket." The young pray to Nald for success in their selfish material endeavors, and the old pray to Thal that they might keep every gill forevermore. Such is the essence of Nald'Thal, of the cultural life of Ul'dah, and of the character of the modern Dunesfolk potato. I intend to talk about Nald'Thal in greater depth in a future video. I've had a few requests to discuss the nature, origins, and influences of the 12. Some of them are more interesting than others, but Nald'Thal is definitely one of the former. For now, I hope that I've satisfied everyone's thirst for a coherent background and origin for the great nation of Ul'dah, and how the rich culture and history of Thanalan has developed over the past millennium. I naturally cannot give a detailed story of each and every one of its citizens in a single video, but if you have any further questions, I'm always happy to answer them as well as I can. I'm Ethys, this has been some kind of lore fix. Share it with your friends, check out the rest of the channel, be sure to sub if you're picking up what I'm putting down, and I will see you all next time.